Hi, my name is Jeremy Humphries. Welcome to our second series of live streams here from the CVP studios in Studley. Over the next 4 months, we've got a session for you per month. And the whole sort of purpose of these sessions is for me to demonstrate and explain to you as a practitioner how I use the camera to tell a story and how I use the camera to engage my audience. Today we're going to kick off with how to frame a shot. Session 2 is on about engagement. How do you engage your audience with colour, use of light, use of depth of field. Session 3 is on obs docs, shooting an observational documentary when the chaos is kicking off all over the place. And session 4 is how to use available light, how to use the light we've got from candlelight to sunlight. But today, how to frame a shot. I'm a DOP, I'm predominantly a documentary DOP. I started off at the BBC and I cut my teeth working on documentaries all around the world. I've been very lucky. I've done anthropological, I've done social, I've done a bit of current affairs. I have a passion for using my camera to tell a story. And it is with the frame and how I frame my shot that I have a direct emotional involvement, a direct emotional engagement with my viewer. How I film it close, if I film it wide, what are the shots I do in between? I want to describe to you a shot that is very dear to my heart. It's a black and white photo by a very famous photographer called Don McCullum. He, of course, as you probably know, has done photography all around the world, predominantly war, but he does a lot of social. And it's a social photograph I want to describe to you. He probably took it back in the 1960s. It's in black and white. It's in a cafe somewhere in the north of England, Sheffield, somewhere like that. And the way it's been framed tells the story. It is basically a couple having a cup of tea. But in the back of the shot, everything that actually, the way it's framed, the way it's been lit, what's going on in that frame, also lends credence and also helps tell the story of those two people in the front of the frame. In the background, there's a menu on a wall. There's a clock that's been cut, framed halfway through the middle, so you can't tell the time, it's timeless. In the back of the shot, there's another couple of couples, they're sipping tea, they all have long coats. They're sitting on wooden chairs, the floor is bare. Our couple sitting in the foreground, which was McCullum actually photographed, he was there to photograph the couple having a cup of tea. They're wearing caps and scarf. The gentleman's wearing a cap. The lady, I presume his wife, is wearing a scarf. In the front, there's a cup of tea. They've got one each, but they're in glass beakers. He's got a cigarette. The ash is a bit too long. It's about to fall off. They've got a bowl of sugar in front of each other. The whole frame, the vanishing point or the perspective, which I'll go into in a minute, behind, everything comes together as a cohesive whole. I can look at that photo. I can look at that photo as well as I look at paintings and be engaged. It does something to my subconscious. It engages me deep, deep down. It's a beautiful shot. Just the way he's framed it, I can almost smell that cafeteria. So the way I frame when I have my camera on my shoulder is important. I've just come off a two-part series for BBC One last December called This Is My Song. Amateurs, for the first time, given the opportunity to record a song in a big, posh recording studio. How I framed my shot, again, has a direct influence in terms of the emphasis I'm giving my viewer. A lot of it was shot close up, the people singing for the first time. It's passionate, it's emotional. You want that mood. But a lot of it was also shot wide to give the scene context, to see the band in the background, or to see the close-up of the mother on the other side of the room, crying as her son sang the song. So it's a mixture of different shots, and that's what we call a sequence. And as a DOP, and as you guys as camera operators, and those that direct as well, we basically have two jobs to do. On one side, we have the technical. That's getting all the shots and framing the shots so the editor has something to edit together and create a sequence. On the other side, we've got the story. And when I'm actually framing my shot, as I'm going to be describing to you over the next 45 minutes or so, I'm actually using that sort of knowledge of the story to decide what shots I go for and so create a sequence that my editor can then actually cut. I describe it on my training as a railway line. A railway line that goes forever together with two rails. On one side, the technical, getting the shots for the sequence, and on the other, using the story to actually enable you to get those shots. So how do we frame? As I say, my background's at the BBC. I used to be a DOP there. I'm now a freelance DOP. I also have my own company called Skills to Film. Skills to Film, we actually train those working their way into the industry how to use the camera to tell a story, and we do start with basic framing. We're going to pull up a few slides. We've got some footage to show you. Behind the cameras here, we've got Matt, who's going to be doing all the stuff with the controls. We've also got Melissa, who's going to be funneling all the questions into me. So if you've got any questions, please do ask them. And as we go through the next 45 minutes or so, we would like your questions, please. And I'll try and give you some answers. So let's start off with the basic shot grammar. Where do we begin? And in a minute, I'm going to talk about storyboarding, when we storyboard, when we don't. But this shot grammar is what we use whether we're storyboarding or not. It's always in the back of my mind. So let's bring up our friend here at CVP, Taha. Taha is one of our colleagues here. We'll have a look at him, and there's a nice shot of him in the back lot here. And we're just going to put over a standard grid or standard frame indicating what shots we talk about. Now, first up, I just want to say to you all that I am very specific about the shot sizes I call, or when I'm actually doing some directing, I've got a camera operator working with me, or whether I'm shooting myself. The reason being, if I say a mid-shot, I mean a mid-shot cuts at the waist. And if I say a close-up, as we'll see in a minute, that's a specific shot as well. The reason being, and if Matt can just come back to me just for a second, the reason why I'm so specific about that is if I have two cameras, and often I'm shooting with two cameras, I want both shots to be the same, so I cut, they don't jump. So when we say a mid shot, we mean cut at the mid, at the waist. And if we say a close-up, we mean just cutting below the neck. There's no point in having a mid shot that's cut slightly lower down at the thigh or slightly up at the breast, and it cuts with another operator doing something completely different. So we have a standard. Let's go back to the grid again. So we have a standard that we actually apply. So there we go, right-hand side, you've got all the titles. The one couple of shots that are key to me, the one or two couple of shots that are key to me, are the medium shot, that's cutting at Taha's waist, and also the close-up in terms of just cutting slightly above his head and also slightly below his neck. And as we'll see when we talk about framing, when I play you in some show reels during the course of this session, you'll see what I mean. The other shots are standard grammar, full-length shot, that's fairly explanatory. Next shot in terms of medium full shot, it's not a shot that I use that often, but again, we're working our way to the mid shot. Mid shot, as I say, cuts at the waist. Close up, absolutely, a medium clip, it's the close up, so I'm just reading on a monitor from a little bit of a distance here. On the close up, as I say, that's the key shot, just a little bit of the top of the head and also just below the neck. And then going in for the maximum, I call it a BCU, it's sometimes called the extreme close-up as well. So those are the basic shots. Those are the basic grammar shots that we use when we're filming, when we have the camera on our shoulder, or as we see in a minute, when we're actually using a storyboard. They are the basic grammar, and we all talk these shots, yeah? It is standard, Matt just comes back to me, it is standard language that we use, a director to a cameraman. It's what I would use if I was storyboarding, but also at the same time, if I'm shooting a camera on my shoulder, those are the shots that I would naturally select in terms of cutting at the waist, cutting just below the neck, whatever. We use that as the standard language, the standard symmetry of shots. Okay, what I want to talk to you about as well is how we actually divide our shots up into thirds. Matt's got a grid he's just going to pull up. This grid is what I basically have in the back of my mind when I'm framing in terms of applying it to all the shots we've just been speaking about. You'll see there are 4 red crosses there. Traditionally, it is assumed that we won't actually place anything dead center in our frame. We actually have these 4 points of interest that subconsciously we as humans are actually engaged by. So there's 4 points, as you can see. And you can see there are 9 zones. Those 9 zones are actually areas of interest. If you actually pull up Don McCullen's shot, the couple having tea, apply this grid over it, and you'll see the couple are on one side, bottom right. The top right is the clock I mentioned, yeah? Top left is the menu, bottom left is the vinyl floor. And if we now apply it to one of our own shots, actually, before we actually just apply it to the shot, we're just going to show you a standard shot. It's a lovely establishing shot coming up of a beach. I think it's in Bali. There we go. So there we go, without the grid. Lovely shot, works well, composition. If we now apply the grid to it, so we see the Bali beach with the grid, you'll see what I mean. So we have the bottom right-hand cross over the, what is it, a restaurant? It's a bar, something like that, but it's of interest. On the left, of course, bottom left, we have the sea, equally important. We're in Bali, after all, we're in the tropics. But look what we've done with an effect with the top 6 zones in our frame. It's predominantly sky. That's because the photographer's thinking, wonderful sky, wonderful colours, we want to give it depth, let's make the importance of the sky in the way we're making the sky the most important thing there. It is the most important thing in that shot, and rightly so, it looks great with the sunset. The sea and the restaurant are equally important, but they probably make less significance the actual sky, which, as I say, has those 6 zones. So what we actually place in those zones is of importance. And when we're framing, I have these 9 zones or so in the back of my mind, and I'm trying to give equal importance to each. I'm not trying to let one become too overbearing or distracting in particular than what's going on in one of the other zones. So that's the key grid we actually use. What I'm now going to do is just come to some standard shots that we actually would always apply this grid to. These shots, we're going to start off with an establishing shot. I think it's Budapest. There. This is the terms of sequence filming. I'm always aware what shots do I need. The establishing shot would be one of them. Look how it's been framed. Very much foreground going off to background. I'll come, if I may, in a couple of minutes' time, just back to something called a vanishing point. But it sets the scene. An establishing shot doesn't actually necessarily need people in. But in terms of a sequence, we're actually a bit thick, us viewers, us humans, in terms of we actually need geography. We need context. We need placement. The establishing shot often then moves into a long shot. The long shot, we've got a guy here, of a lad on a riverboat, Vietnam, Cambodia, something like that. The long shot actually establishes in my frame the connection between the human being, in this case the lad, and it puts him in context with his background. And there's something else going on as well. We're beginning to tell a story. Does he live there? Is he being sent by his mum on a mission down to the market? Is he going fishing? Is he just playing? There's a lot going on. And in the long shot, we start introducing this idea of the story. And if I were able to put my grid over that, you can see where the grid would be. We'd have one roughly over the lad, one slightly above on the sky, and 2 over on the right-hand side, one just below the bow of the boat, and one on that lovely window or the doorway through to the house behind. It's a beautiful frame that works just in terms of telling a story. It's no different to the shot of the Bucharest, the shot of Bucharest before, but we're introducing the human element now for the very first time. Single person in shot. He's no more than, he's probably 20% of the height of the frame. I wouldn't expect on a long shot for the person to be any higher than 50% of the actual height of the frame. So the height of the frame, 100%, he's no more, the character here, he's a lot smaller than that, but normally I would expect whoever I'm putting in there to be no higher than 50% of the height, no more than 50% of the height of the frame. So we don't give them any more due significance than what's going on in the background. That's the long shot. The two shot. The two shot here, we've actually got 2 characters, a boy and a girl. Actually, they're sitting in a cafe. I like this shot very much. When I'm doing the majority of my sort of documentary filming, I'm actually shooting, as I mentioned at the beginning, obs docs. When you're filming obs doc, the frame you're going to come up, medium shot close up certainly, but this two-shot over and over again. Why does it work? It works predominantly for me because I establish a relationship. I establish a relationship between two people. A shot just of the lad or a shot just of the woman on their own wouldn't give me that relationship. It's our job as actual cinematographers or DOP that when we're filming this, we need to give, as I've already mentioned, the editor the shots that he can actually edit, he or she to actually edit, but also we're telling a story. And this two-shot works in terms of establishing a relationship and telling us a story. And there's a couple of other things you should be aware of here as well. In terms of the actual way it's been framed, we are giving the lad more emphasis than the woman. And that's what's often called a deep two. You will be called, as I am time and time and time again, when you're framing a shot, to give a deep two. It basically means we actually have something or someone on the right who's not necessarily 100% visible, and we then have somebody on the left, as is the case with here. It can be called, and excuse the phrase, it can also be called a dirty single as well, where you just would have a single shot, but something else is just slightly obscuring it. The other thing to say with this shot as well is if I was shooting this, I would do this two-shot from here, and I would then probably move over to the lad's right shoulder, and I would get a similar shot of the woman on the other side of the frame. So I work those shots, and I'll be talking a bit more about how I do that at the end, but we're just speaking about framing, and the two-shot is a very, very key shot just to establish that relationship. The mid-shot, of course, we've got a mid-shot of Taha. I've already mentioned cuts at the waist, and the mid-shot is now a sort of progression in terms of it's often a single person, and we're now starting to move. We're on a journey, guys. We're on a journey into the close-up, which we'll see in a minute. And we are building, if Taha was speaking to someone, we might have the two-shot, as we've just had on the previous slide. This is the traditional mid-shot. It's a good shot. I like the frame. The issue I have with it a little bit is it can be, in terms of the close-up, not as powerful. The beauty of the mid-shot, though, is you do actually get to see body language. And any frame, when you're framing up, should contain body language. If Matt just comes back to me briefly, we're going to talk in a minute about being instinctive and gut feeling about in terms of the frame you choose. But just in terms of actually body language, in terms of letting it dictate your frame, is very key. Taha on that slide there might be using, I don't know, he might be writing. He might be doing something with his knife. He might be cutting something. Or he might be actually sort of taking a photograph. He might be doing something with his hands. To be able to see the relationship between the face and the hands is key. So that's why the mid-shot works very well. And in an interview situation, it works well as well. To see the sort of body language, how the person's sitting, how they're actually sort of facing, the mid-shot is a very important shot. But the close-up that Matt can show us on Taha, the close-up is possibly one of the most, if not the most important shot we're going to use. The beauty of the close-up is it shows everything. The human face is the window to the soul. It shows us every expression, every emotion, every mood. And the way we use it, of course, is down to you pointing the camera. And the way we use it, of course, is down to you actually in terms of what the story, and there'll be a bit more of that before we finish as well. But just fundamentally at the moment, I want to show you all the different frames of shots. We've had an establishing shot. We've had a long shot. We've had a two-shot. We've had a mid-shot, and now the close-up. And it's your decision when you're actually framing, when you're actually filming, what frames you metaphorically take down off your shelf with all these shots lined up, and which ones you choose to use. And just before, we're going to come on to storyboards in a second, just before I leave this, just a little bit, if I might just go back to the, let's go back to the mid-shot, Matt, please, if I may. There's a question just coming up. I'll just make this point. I'm telling you the obvious, guys, I'm sure, but just be aware that we always give our subjects a little bit of headroom. And we always make sure that in terms of when we're actually framing, and if we might just go back to the two-shot, Matt, as well, that when we're actually framing, you can see maybe needs a little bit more headroom, our friend there, but on the left, we've just got a little bit of space. Don't put the back of our subject up against the frame. And that gap in front, guys, in front of both the lady and the man, is what we call the air gap. And that traditionally, there are one or two exceptions, which I'll mention at the end, that traditionally, that air gap, that big gap in between the two is what one looks through, your subject looks through in terms of whoever they're addressing, be it the interviewer on the side of the camera, might be yourself, or in this case, he's talking to his friend across the table. So a bit of headroom, please, bit of backroom, and an air gap. Right, I think we have a question. I think we have a clever system whereby you're going to hear Melissa's voice, and Melissa is going to ask the question. So we just pause for a question. Here we go.
Have you got any tips on how to avoid dead space in a shot?
To avoid?
Dead space in a shot.
Dead space. Well, let's just go back to the two-shot again. Thanks, Melissa. Let's just go back to the two-shot again, if we may. In terms of dead space, in terms of when we're actually framing, the dead space in effect there is what he's actually looking through, and I'm actually calling the air gap, and that is what we traditionally use. In terms of framing something that is behind a subject, or if you're filming somebody on their own and it's obviously just not working, then if we come back to me, Matt, I often come up against that sort of scenario. It's often the case, whoever's asking that, just moving the camera slightly to one side or the other and just accommodating, or maybe getting your subject to move to actually accommodate or to mask that dead space, or something we'll be looking at very much in live stream 2 when we talk about engagement with depth of field, is to maybe put that background out of focus. Let's talk about storyboards. So storyboards I do use when I'm doing maybe fiction, or maybe when I'm doing a promotional film, maybe when I'm doing a corporate film. Why do we use storyboards? Well, the basis of a storyboard is if you draw the shots, and you don't have to be a brilliant drawer to do it, you just do a little pin man or pin woman, whatever. You see how it works on your piece of paper before you even leave to go on location, and you can see it works. And before you've even left your home, you can, or your office, you can actually check, yes, that scene would actually cut. I have reassurance, I have confidence. The key thing though is don't be too constricted to your storyboard that when you get on location and some amazing shot actually happens, that you're not flexible. One has to be flexible, and we'll look on a storyboard in just a second and you'll see what I mean. If we have storyboard, the first one up, please. My rule of thumb is any storyboard or any sequence that I shoot with or without a storyboard needs a minimum of 3 shots. Here we have a car pulling up, somebody getting out, they walk out of the car, they go in the door, they close the door. Simple as that. That storyboard, 3 shots, with a little description underneath, means when you're on location, you can quickly get out your bag, check, know you've got that shot, you at least have a scene that will work. It will cut together. What of course it doesn't mean is you haven't got any flexibility when you get back into the edit to actually do anything else. You would probably have to use all those 3 shots. You're sort of committed to using that. So if we employed the next storyboard in terms of a 7-shot storyboard, what would that actually give us? Well, of course, it's the obvious. You've got many more shots. But look at the shots in particular, particularly shot 2, where we're going in closer. So we've gone from what is basically a long shot into a medium shot, and we can actually see the door opening. I should imagine the person gets out during that shot. Then we go to a close-up, the foot by the wheel. Then we go back to the shot that we had on the original story, is that long shot again, where the person walks in front of the bonnet. But then we've got another shot where it's a lovely frame shot of the house. It's a mid-shot, as it says. The person walks up towards the house. Then we go for the close-up of the key going in the door. That's an additional shot. We didn't have that on storyboard 1. And then we have the final shot, which is pretty much a replication of storyboard 1, where they actually go into the house. So 7 shots. 7 shots is giving me much more flexibility. It's giving the editor more flexibility. And if you just come back to me briefly, Matt, the other key thing about the way that's been expanded is it gives me more ability to actually tell a story. And I'm going to suggest something to you there as well. We see on all those shots the face of the person, in effect, on the storyboard, getting out the car, walking into the house. It may be that in your story, it's a suspense story. It may be in your story you don't want to see the face. So we might see the shot of the foot by the tire, by the wheel. We might see the key going into the door, but we never see the face of the person. That too could be planned during your storyboard when you're actually putting the whole thing together. We don't want to see the face of the person. And of course, the story then goes off in a completely different direction. So the storyboard is useful in terms of crafting your story, in terms of something in your head. The storyboard is probably the first time when you actually can put it down on paper. And I say, I'm rubbish at drawing. Don't worry about that. It's the first indication of you turning your story in your head to pictures. It works. But don't be so constricted to those shots that when you get on location, you don't see something else. There might be something else happening in the frame you think is worth doing. Get it. Shoot it. You'll employ it. You'll use it somehow. And likewise, don't be so constricted by actually the storyboard that when you get there, you get an inspired idea. Well, actually, as that person pulls up, it's lovely to see them in silhouette because there just happens to be a white wall behind. It can work both ways. As I say, it gives you the confidence, but at the same time, it gives you that ability to be a little bit flexible on location as well. I've got a film now, a video now I'm going to show you. This is something called Fisherman Friend that was shot. Oh, we shot it about 3 or 4 years ago. It's about a band that sing wonderful sea shanties down in Cornwall, the Fisherman Friends. And this is the opening sequence. We'll play it through. It's about 45 seconds first. We'll just play it through without me talking. But I want you just to look at it from a point of view from a storyboard. The director actually storyboarded every single shot. We'll have a quick look at it, and then I'll play it back again, and I'll give you my sort of version of how we shot it and why we shot it and why David Pearson, the producer, storyboarded it as he did. Okay, here we go. So, Matt, if you can play that, please. This is Fisherman's Friends, opening title sequence of, and as I say, it's about 45 seconds or so.
Once there were 3 captains brown who sailed upon the ocean. Sing out aloud, but sing aloud, boys. They scrapped and fought all day and night and caused a great commotion. Sing out aloud, but sing aloud, boys. Ho, wait, ho! Sing aloud, and sing up to
This summer's showbiz initiation will make new demands on us all.
ho, wait, ho! Sing aloud, and sing up to
All us old mates, close as a tin of pilchards, signed for £1 million. Sounds like a dream come true, but some things aren't worth risking for any amount of money.
Great. Brings back happy memories. I'll just let Matt re-cue it up again. I'll ask him to play it again in a second. The key thing on that was a number of key things. The first of all, did you notice it's all shot mid-shot? There's no close-ups. Okay, there might be the close-up of the dog or whatever. The dog, by the way, is just us. That wasn't storyboarded. The dog is an exact example, a key example of us being flexible on the day. And of course, it's fun. The dog's pulling the rope. We shot it. But in terms of all the shots, they're all roughly mid-shot. In fact, they're more than mid-shots. I'm moving the camera up and down on a crane. But in terms of the size of shot, in terms of the people, it's how they move in the frame. They run towards us or they row towards us. It's them actually changing the frame size by their movement within the frame. And in terms of that sequence as well, there's various continuity things in terms of making sure that the guys on the right are always pulling the rope one way, the guys on the left doing vice versa. But it's actually, as you can hear, being played to music, being filmed to music. So we've got various choreography in situations where we want certain things to happen at certain times. I'll let Matt play it back again, if I may. Thanks, Matt. The other key thing to say about it as well is when we're actually shooting in this sort of situation, when we're actually using the storyboard, as you can see, I'm using a crane. I'm actually sort of working in very tight, confined spaces. I'm still very much trying to work to the actual the descriptions I was giving in the shot. So mid-shot, going into a sort of a tighter shot. You've got the dog there, and then you've got the lovely top shot looking down on them. So although it's storyboarded, although it's very cleverly storyboarded in terms of the way David's actually planned it out, I, as a cameraman, am making sure I actually adhere to that because I'm aware that when we play the music to it, thank you, Matt, when we actually play the music to it, the actual movement of the crane or the actual shot size is probably going to fit in with certain beats in the music. So the way I actually sort of study my storyboard when I'm presented with it is actually very important. In that sort of situation, I do try and stick to it. The other key thing about that scene as well is it's all happening very quickly. And just on a pure technical point of view, we were getting a crane in there. I had to be careful of shadows and I always had to be careful of the light. I like working with my backlight, and so my framing, and when I was wrecking with David, we recceed that particular location, I did want to make sure that we were in the right place at the right time. So the shots he had on his storyboard, I could actually realise by not getting a camera shadow or having the sun in the right place, so on and so forth. Just while we're on that, if I may, I'm just going to ask Matt to actually pull back a shot, something I want to relate to that. I'd like to go back to the Budapest shot, if I may. During the actual Fisherman Friends shooting, you could see there was always a background, there was always a perspective. Thanks, Matt. And I just wanted to mention this to you in terms of vanishing point. You saw it when they were rowing in on the boat, you had depth to it. You saw it when they were running, pulling the rope up one of the corridors there, you had depth to it. And I just want to flag up what I mean. If you look at the sort of basilica on the right, it's obviously much bigger than the statue way over on the hill on the left. If I drew a line between the two, it's something called a vanishing point. We have it in painting, we have it in photography, we have it in filmmaking, where obviously something that is distant is that much smaller than something in the foreground. But if Matt comes back to me, it's something very key in terms of engagement with the human psyche. It's something called perspective. And in all the shots I do when I'm storyboarding or when I'm doing my observational documentary, I'm thinking about perspective. Any frame that David or I actually draw up on a storyboard, I make sure the background is not flat. We want depth. We are switched on as human beings and our subconscious by depth. And depth is shown by the symmetry of the basilica on that photograph on the right, and then way off that smaller statue. We register that as perspective. We are interested in that perspective. In every frame, even if it's on an interview, I try and use perspective. Of course, I don't always use storyboards. A lot of my stuff is observational documentary, as I say. I did a film about 10 years ago about a social situation of a mother in a relationship, mother and son relationship that was going through issues in Southampton. And in terms of my frame shots, my frame sizes, my frame decision, I had no storyboard. It was kicking off all over the place. It was a very emotional story. It was what was going on in my head at that particular moment in time. I had to be flexible, I had to be instinctive, and I had to be, what did it feel like in my gut? What do I think is the most important shot here now? And the way I actually filmed it, I let my instinct sort of take me. I still made sure I had enough shots for the editor, but at the same time, as I say, I was being compassionate, I hope. I was listening, I was watching. So the mother, for example, one morning, she was looking out of her window. She was very upset. Out through the window, you had kids from another family playing. I got a shot, almost in silhouette, just a big long shot of the mother standing there on her own, in silhouette, from way back at the side of the room. It set the context. No noise, no audio, just the kids outside playing, not her kids, some other kids from another family. I then tracked in and got a close-up. And the editor used those shots, and he actually milked those shots, so to speak. He actually kept me coming back to them. The wide shot put her in context with all the stuff that was going on in her life, and then the close-up gave the power. So how I use my shots is very much determined by story. The shots and the frames I showed you, the establisher, the long shot, the two shot, the mid shot, and close-up. What quantities I use those are all down to me, and the shots I actually think will best relate the story. Hence why you saw all mid shots there in the Fisherman Friends. On my film down in Southampton, it was mostly close-ups for obvious reasons. It was a very emotional sort of scenario. So in terms of creating mood, I'm actually using the shots to dictate. And we've got another question coming up, but just to say, we're going to play a film in a minute where it's all goes, mid-shots go, and it's all shot close-up. And we're going to play a film towards the end, which is much more sort of wider, so wider shots. So you decide what frames you need that you think best tell your story. We still need some of the other shots as well to make it edit together. But it's the predominance of what shot you think you need to help tell your story the best way. And each subject will be different. Melissa.
Hi, hi Jeremy. For documentaries and obviously on the fly factual stuff in particular, what would you say is a good technique for choosing the correct shot when you're in that moment?
That's very
And
much
when
what
your
I was...
time is so limited.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was just saying. You've got to be in the moment. Where, again, in that Southampton film, and the majority of the stuff I'm doing, okay, it's come more recent. This is my song for the BBC, where there was no storyboard. The director, the producer, a very good friend of mine, and said, Jeremy, we know we got lots going on. There's going to be 2 cameras. There's going to be lots of action, but we've just got to get the emotion of it. So whoever asked that question, it's just, how do you feel? I have this great phrase I use on my, well, I hope it's a great phrase, I use on my training. Don't just film what you see, film what you feel. What feels the right frame at that particular moment in time? My lady by the window, the mother by the window crying, the close-up was the important one, but I wanted a bit of context, so I got the wider shot first, but then I was in there. On This Is My Song, it was frequently somebody close-up singing as well, but often I wanted the wider shot to show the orchestra. So you have to prioritize, but ultimately it is what do you feel as well as what do you see. What I want to do now is just move on just a little bit in terms of other films. I want to play some stuff with predominantly close-up. But also I just wanted to say, just be weaving into this, and we touch more of this on live stream too, what lenses you need, yeah? I'm not going to go too much into depth on that today, because we haven't got the time. But just in terms of these different frame sizes, it's a question of what focal length you need, and you all know about that, but also what speed of lens you need as well. So if you're filming in low light, I was in Sweden a couple of years ago, 4 or 5 years ago now, filming candlelight. Have I got the focal length of lenses to get all these wide shots and close-ups, but have I got the speed lens? In other words, can I film in low light? So I'm also thinking about that. That's running alongside as well in terms of what I'm actually have I actually got the right lenses, so on and so forth, to actually show this mood that I keep talking about, to actually capture this atmosphere. And talking of atmosphere, I'd like to play another video now. This is probably 10 years ago, that I shot in Tokyo. It's the game of pachinko, which is basically a slot machine sort of thing. And this is intense. They don't work, they play in a very busy sort of noisy room. It's a fun, supposedly fun game-like thing to do. And they're all in a long line next to each other. And yet they don't speak to each other. So I've used the close-up in terms of my frame. It's predominantly all close-up to isolate people. And again, live stream 2, we'll be talking more about depth of field, focus pulling. But just today, it's the close-up, how I've used the close-up to isolate and create that mood. And you'll hear Ian, the narrator as well, the presenter, talking about that isolation. They don't even know each other. And this is how I've done it with the use of the close-up. So ask Matt to play that, please. So this is pachinko playing in Tokyo.
To me, this really is a product of Japan's geological lottery, where land is at a premium. Although this room is crowded, these people seem unaware of each other, nor do they hear, consciously, the incessant deafening noise. This is all about just one person facing one machine, having a dialogue with little steel balls.
Thanks, Matt. Again, I love that. I can't describe to you, you can hear a bit of it there, how noisy it was. And I'm trying to show that intimacy with my framing. At the same time, nobody ever speaks. There's the guy there with the cigarette. There's the woman there. There's the shot through the glasses, through the spectacles. My use of close-up there is just to show, as I say, that atmosphere, that mood. And if I'd gone to a mid-shot, and obviously I did film a mid-shot, and I probably filmed a long shot in there as well, it wouldn't have had that same sort of buzz. It wouldn't have had that same sort of hit. So again, your choice of shot and how you execute it is down to you and how you reflect your decisions from the script across to the actual shots you choose. And also key to that scene as well is not just the noise going on, not just the fact they don't know each other, but the fact they're all jammed in there. And something, as I say, I'll talk more about on live stream too, is how I use that. I love the art of the focus pull. But suffice to say now that if I can use the focus pull and blend that into my framing at the same time, the whole thing starts fitting together like a wonderful cohesive whole. And we take the viewer off into this wonderful engagement area where we've just got them. And that's how I start with my use, my choice of frame. I want to move on a little bit just on a couple of little miscellaneous things in terms of framing. So I want to briefly talk to you about the use of cutaways and the use in particular of the human face. And we're all going to be filming the human face more than anything. It is characteristic of what we do, and important it is too. But it isn't necessarily, in terms of my framing, always the shot I do. We've got a shot of Taha's hands here that we're going to pull up. And these are what I sometimes call cutaways. There are other shots in terms of my framing vocabulary, my framing metaphorical shelf again, that I do pull down when I need them. And the hands, we've got a couple of them here. The hands, to me, are an extremely important frame. And that comes back to me. I'll explain why. I was very lucky back, it's 10 or so years ago. I was one of the lucky people to film Harry Patch. Harry Patch was the last British survivor of the First World War. And we took him back to Passchendaele. He said he'd only go back once, and we took him back. And when I went back, he allowed me to film him actually where some of his best pals had actually died. First time he'd been there. And I remember filming his face, and I say the face is very crucially important. But it was the other frames that I took that the editor and the producer then used. In particular, as one of his hands. He had his hand on his walking stick. It's a bitterly cold February afternoon. His hand was knurled, it's holding, it's slightly shaking. It said so much. His face said a lot as well, believe me, but something about the way he was holding that walking stick said just as much. So in terms of my frames and the shots I'm going for, it's not just the face, I'm looking for the other stuff. And it comes back to body language again. If we can just pull up the boy and the girl again, the lad and the lady having that chat. The other thing to say as well is in terms of eye lines. I'm very, very keen in my framing about eye lines. I mentioned this earlier in terms we've come over the lady's shoulder and we can see the guy's eyes. That's very important. If the two shot had been filmed, a little bit framed a little bit to the left, we would only see both sides of their face. So again, we wouldn't give more predominance to the guy. But at the same time, we'd only see one eye from each, his left and her right. Sorry, here on the camera left and camera right, you know what I mean? Yeah? We do like that tight eye line. And something you'll find when you're framing, and if Matt may come back to me, something I'm finding when I'm framing, I'm looking through my viewfinder, I might start off on what a frame that we call a sort of a lazy eye line, which is when you have just both eyes looking at each other from a two-shot, looking across, so it's one eye from one person, one eye from the other. But then as I track round, you see both eyes of the person that we're showing most prominently in our frame. And that comes down to just where we feel comfortable as human beings. We like seeing people seeing both eyes. It's where the soul, it's the eye contact. So that importance of eye lines is very key in terms of where I actually frame, where I actually see the actual person looking in shot, seeing both eyes, seeing both sides of the face if possible. We're just finally going to come on this little sort of miscellaneous area, come back to Taha, and just quickly, would you believe Taha's feet? The only reason I want to put Taha's feet in is I do a fair bit of sort of expeditionary, or have done a fair bit of expeditionary filming, going up volcanoes, going across deserts. I've done a fair bit of geology stuff. And I also train the Bear Grylls The Island, the first series of that. The contestants actually, or those that actually that end up on the island, have to do their own filming. And I often talk to them about cutaways, but a bit like the hands in terms of the frames, I'm talking to them about, give me a cutaway that helps tell the story. And what better on all those things I've just been saying in terms of going on a journey is feet, yeah? We let the feet walk into the frame and we let them walk out. But it helps tell the story. They're on a journey. We as humans, as viewers, love journeys. It's a great cutaway. The editor's happy and the storyteller, the director's happy as well. We use both. Yeah, it's again that railway line. It's even better on the island, for example, because it tells the story more, because one of the guys whose feet I might get one of my the people on the island to be filming, they could have lost their shoe or they could have cut their foot. So you're telling the story more with that cutaway. So the cutaways, the actual framing of these cutaways and how you frame them, that shot had been filmed very nicely low and quite tight, is more powerful as well. And one thing I just say on the actual framing is I like to get myself in close. We'll talk more about this on live stream 3, observational documentary filming, but I like to be in there. That last shot of the boots, he was in there. The photographer, she was actually in there nice and close, yeah? So I like to be close to my subject as well. Let's move on, because time will fly by. I want to show you my film in Peru. It's only a 30-second section. The reason being, this again is different to Fisherman Friend and different to Pachinko. Different in terms of it's all wide shots, or establishing shots predominantly. It's a scene of terraces. It's got a bit of Machu Picchu at the beginning of it. But I'm actually using the light, and again, more of that in a later live stream, but I'm actually using the light, so it's early in the morning, to help me use my frame and get more out of it with the shadows. But in particular, it's a classic example of where a close-up just wouldn't have worked. So it's the use of the mid shot, and to a certain extent it's the use of the long shot in my frame to help tell my story. It's about 35 seconds. We'll let Matt play it in. We'll play it in with the audio, and Ian again will help explain a little bit more of the story. Thanks, Matt.
It's a land shaken by earthquakes and devastated by volcanoes. Yet 500 years ago, this inhospitable terrain was mastered by the Incas. In the countryside around Arequipa, we can see how that Inca solution has transformed the landscape. Everywhere there are terraces. And terraces. And terraces. And terraces.
I'll get Matt to cue that up again, then we'll play it back. But again on that, just if we can think about half an hour to the grid. Think about the grid on that. Now, most of our full crosses will be on terraces, which is great. It's about terraces. But even with a shot with Ian, he's not dead center, he's off to one side. So I'm still using those 4 crosses in the back of my mind when I'm framing up any shot, basically. The other key thing to it as well, if Matt's got it ready, we can play it in, Matt. As we play it in, you'll actually see there, just the idea of using the light very early in the morning, because the clouds was down in amongst all the lovely sort of ravines. There's a bit of Machu Picchu just coming out of the mist. I waited a long time to get that. It's beautiful, isn't it, when it's just revealed like that? Of course, I use that into the terraces, and you can see the shadows conjured by the terraces. A few slightly tighter, if you will, establishing shots, but the majority are establishing shots, I think you'll agree. And also just be aware panning speed. I don't normally pan my camera much, but where I do, just to catch Ian there, or where I do on a previous, earlier in the scene there, I'm just panning at a very gentle rate. I'm not a great use of the pan, but there it helps, just in terms of telling the story more, but we just be careful not to pan too fast. The other thing in terms of when we're framing on a situation like that, was I'm actually trying to use the sky. There was a lovely, just where you could see the edge, the outline of the mountains in the distance, and I gave skies. I was thinking as I was filming it, it's all a little bit claustrophobic with the framing. Even though they were sort of big establishing shots, I never gave it what we referred to in Budapest earlier, that perspective. And that perspective just gives it the depth. I mean, okay, mountains, context, it works for me now. So again, even on the establishing shots, I'm giving my editor a little bit of choice. We must move on. A couple of key things I'm doing when I'm actually filming. I'm listening and I'm watching. I wear headphones so I can actually hear what's going on. It helps me tune in. But the question I was asked earlier in terms of how do we decide what shot, that listening and that watching is all playing into my sort of stream, if you like, of sort of thought process in terms of where I point the camera when. I'm still on a 10-second hold on each shot or thereabouts. I'm not jumping around, I'm not whipping the camera around, but I am letting the scene, what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing, dictate. And I'm being instinctive. I mentioned earlier, I'm going with what feels right in my gut. In terms of the camera, on a 1/2-inch censored camera, I'm probably filming on a 10 or 12 mil focal length, yeah? I'm not zooming in, I'm not going back to the other side of the room and zooming in on the majority of the stuff I do. I'm getting in there, as I said earlier, and shooting on a 10 or 12 mil. On a super 35 mil sensor, a lot of us are filming on FS7s, C300s now. I'm probably on a sort of 20, 24 mil, something like that, on my slightly bigger sensor camera. And in terms of my frame, I actually use, and we'll talk more about this on observational documentaries on Livestream 3, but I'm actually using my body to actually make the frame in terms of I'm moving in closer or I'm moving further away. So the two shot we saw, I've already made the point that we saw over the shoulder, dirty single, whatever you want to call it. I would then move in and get a slightly closer frame of the lad and then spin around and look at the woman. I wouldn't zoom. My zoom are my feet. That's how I change frame. So again, the person that was asking me earlier, I'm being instinctive and I'm listening and I'm watching to decide my frame, but to change frame, I'm not whipping and panning around, I'm trying to make it all usable. In terms of a few frames that are, in terms of the way I frame, that's slightly different, I mentioned just then I don't go to the back of the room and zoom in. If I'm doing covert filming, I was one of the operators on the first couple of series of Hunted, that's when I do move back. And in terms of my frame, I do zoom in, I do film through things. It's covert, it's intelligence, people are sort of being secretive. That's where the framing wouldn't be so overt, if you like, where you're in somebody's face, like I was with my lady with the mother by the window. I would hang back on some of the Hunted stuff and film through things. And of course, again, we come back to that shallow depth of field. We are isolating the person. But in terms of your framing, there might be something out of focus in the foreground, might be something out of focus in the background. But that person would actually be isolated there. Zoomed in maybe a little bit there. As I say, it's covert filming. We would get the impression as viewers that we are hanging back a bit. So framing is important, not just in terms of the size, but framing is important in terms of where you place yourself with the camera in relation to the actual subject you're filming. Negative framing, this comes up a couple of times. If we might just go back to the two shot. In terms of negative framing, a negative frame is basically, I mentioned with our friend, the lad on the left here, the air gap is in front. As I said, when we looked at this first time round, you would normally look through the air gap in a traditional frame. That's fine. We all know that. Traditional film, grammar, symmetry, whatever. If, however, in this shot, he now looked over his right shoulder, maybe there was somebody coming down to just whisper something in his ear, he would actually be in what's called a negative frame. He would be looking through the negative space, i.e. away from the air gap. He would be looking through the negative space in the frame. When do we use that? That may come back to me. Again, it might be for something covert, where somebody's looking over their shoulder and say, actually, they're not over there, they're over there. Where the air gap is still here, but they're taking this person here into their confidence. Or it might be on the island. It's classic use of the negative frame on the island, where somebody is talking about somebody else over their shoulder to somebody else you may or may not be able to see. And the majority of the air gap, which traditionally, as I say, they would look through, is void. They just don't look, they're ignoring it. Us, the audience, is still over there, but there's something going on over here. So the negative frame can be very, very powerful, but it needs to be used judiciously in terms of when we actually use it. Because if it's used incorrectly or in the wrong place, it can jar and it can have the wrong effect. But used correctly, in those examples I've just given, it can be used very, very effectively. Okay, we're going to take a few more questions in a minute just before we end. Just in terms of framing as well, we've spoken predominantly about filming the human body. It doesn't always have to be framing for the human body. You can frame for light. I'm thinking shadows. Think about my terraces in Peru. Might be something closer to home. The shadow of a beautiful oak tree over on the right-hand side means you put the actual tree over on the left. We can frame for colour. Bonfire on the right, somebody lighting a fire, lovely deep blue sky on the left. Again, we'll be talking about colour engagement in live stream too. But just in terms of framing, I can frame for colour in terms of just different patches of colour in my frame. In Sweden, I had somebody lit by a candle on one side of the frame, and in the back, there was a lovely blue shaft of light coming through for the snow. It made us think, or I hope it made us think, that all was well in the foreground here, with lovely, comfortable, cosy scene around the candle, but all was tough and hard work outside. The blue, the coldness of the light away from the warmth light. So I frame for colour, and as I've already mentioned, I frame for perspective as well. That basilica, remember, in the foreground. And stuff I've done in the past, where I've actually, in Africa, I've had objects in the foreground. I've actually taken a photograph in Angola during the Civil War, where in the Civil War of 1997, I had a missile in the foreground. and I had a lovely couple walking completely nonchalant over the other side of the frame. Top left-hand red cross, if I could have put it there, in terms of my grid. Yeah, again, those 9 zones playing to our advantage. But my framing, not necessarily being dictated always by people, but sometimes it's other objects, or could be light or colour, whatever. In terms of you picking up the framing, I often say, watch your TV. Yeah, it's a silly thing to say, but watch the TV with the audio turned down. See where you actually see how the camera operator, the DOP, the director have actually used their frame to engage you, the viewer. We are all primed as viewers, ready to receive. We just need that sort of trigger. So turn the audio down, just to lower the audio down a bit, and just look how they've actually been framed. And I still do it, and often it's still the best way to actually engage your audience and learn how to engage your audience to see how other people have done it. Now, Melissa, I think, has got a couple more questions, so we're just going to feed those in. Fundamentally, I think, just while we're getting those questions ready, fundamentally, just when you're framing, feel it in your gut. As I say, how does it make you feel as well as how does it make you, how does it make you feel as well as film how it makes you feel, or film how you feel rather than just film what you see. Yeah, that's the key thing. Be instinctive, be engaged, and when you actually sort of then put either in a storyboard scenario where you can be flexible, or a more obs-doc scenario where it's all just happening, you can just sort of rely on what we've been programmed to for thousands of years in terms of what feels right at a particular moment in time. Here we go, Melissa, thanks.
So obviously you've said when you use prime lenses and when you use a zoom in on a covert, but do you have a preference on which one you would use? On a prime or a zoom in, which lenses do you prefer to work with?
I am still very much using a zoom lens because it does give me the flexibility, I'll be honest. I'm not zooming backwards and forwards when I'm filming, but if I'm doing something like the first couple of series of Hunter that I worked on, I've got the option where I can't necessarily move to zoom in and get a tighter shot, so it does give me the flexibility. I'm still using a prime lens predominantly for a sort of low light situation, or where I'm in that sort of situation where I might be shooting something for 4K and I just want that resolution. But I am, I'll be honest, still using zoom lenses to give me the flexibility. And in the next live stream and the ObsDocs live stream, I'll talk a little bit more about that because some zooms still handicap me a little bit in terms of the way they work on Super 35mm cameras. But I love the prime, but just sometimes it can just hinder just a little bit too much.
Thank you. And then just one more. So, you know, when you work on an obs and working off the fly, when you walk around the environment, or do you go mentally prepare a storyboard in your head, or is it completely just a blank canvas?
No, very much. Even if I haven't written down a storyboard, there is always a storyboard in my head, both when I'm sort of walking around, getting the camera out the bag, and very much, guys, when I'm actually filming as well. I'm starting to think, right, I've got this shot, that's done, it's all nicely in focus, it's all working. What's the next one? And that might mean a move back or a move whatever, a pan, or maybe sort of even a physical move back. But yes, I am planning. I suppose the simple answer to that is, back to our railway line really, I've got to make sure that I've got all the shots, but also what order I do them in is very much down to the story, as I've mentioned. And I am in my mind mentally computing as I'm filming what is the next important one what is the next important frame I should be doing that ticks boxes on both sides of my rail line. Yeah. Okay, thanks, Melissa. So just to sum up then, guys, thank you very much for listening. How to frame a shot is important, obviously. It is, as I think you picked up now, very much how I feel in terms of what decides the shots I do. And ultimately, it comes down to you just being there in the moment. A storyboard is great, but don't let it handicap, don't let it hinder, so when you actually get there, you don't think of something, or you don't see the dog in The Fisherman's Friends. Be open to both. Both work, though obviously on the ObsDoc you'll find using a storyboard, the opportunity to use that actually works less, because you often just got to film on the fly. Thank you very, very much for listening. I hope this has been useful. Next month on the 6th of March, we'll be talking about engagement with colour, light and depth of field. But meantime, do keep feel free to send in more questions. I'm part of the CVP in terms you want to contact me through the CVP, that's fine. You're very welcome to keep asking questions, and hopefully we'll see you again next time. But meantime, thanks so much for listening. We've gone up to our hour, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks and goodbye.